Today on Biblical Higher Ed Talk, I sit down with Dr. Ryan Kuehner, clinical psychologist, to discuss the rapid rise of anxiety and depression among college-age students. What's contributing to it, and how do we get ahead of it? Thank you for tuning in today. I'm your host, Philip Dearborn, and I have been looking forward to this episode with Ryan Kuehner. Ryan and I served a lifetime ago together at one of our ABHE institutions where he led the counseling department. Since that time, he has launched into a really fascinating career that we're going to touch on a little bit in this episode. But he's definitely somebody who has a great pulse on mental health as a trained psychotherapist. One of the things that's kind of interesting, and we'll get to this at the end of the episode, is his work with the Ketamine Institute, something that we've heard a lot about in the news, sometimes misrepresented, is ketamine as a treatment for anxiety and depression. So we'll touch on that at the end of the episode. But I've invited Ryan in really to talk about the rapid rise of anxiety and depression among college-age students, something that we are seeing a lot of at our colleges and universities and seminaries. And there are various efforts to try to address that on those campuses. Ryan is certainly an expert in this field and looking forward to the conversation. So welcome, Ryan, and thanks for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me, Phil.
Absolutely. Before we get into our questions, just a shout out to Logos Bible Software. They are the sponsor for this episode. We have a great partnership with Logos. They will be at our annual meeting coming up next month. So I encourage you to stop by and see the various products that they have for Bible study, a very, very powerful tool. So Ryan, kick off our conversation here so that our audience can get to know you just a little bit. So you're a psychotherapist. Why did you choose that as a career?
Well, it's an interesting story, somewhat embarrassing, but I'll tell it like it was. I was various majors in undergrad and had no direction. And so I saw a list of majors on the wall. And I prayed to God, and this is so immature, but I said, I'm going to close my eyes and point, and whatever my finger hits, I'm going to take that as a sign. So I don't recommend that. My finger hit psychology. I'm like, well, all right, I'm in. I don't know what that is. And so I went to the psych department and signed up as a psych major. I had no idea you needed a grad degree. But as I started to take courses, it was clear that I was in the exact place that fit the gift God gave me. So as I matured over the decades, I realized why I stayed in it. And it really came down to being able to keep people from the pain I've experienced and walk with those who have. And so he's tethered me, as immature as I was, to the area he wanted me to be in.
What a beautiful story. And so when it came to choosing your wife, did you go through the college yearbook and follow a similar kind of methodology?
No, a little more scientific, but he provided that as well.
That's good. Now, and I know you, since we have worked together, and it is amazing to see when somebody clearly has a gifting. You are a gifted psychotherapist and done a great job in training others, and now running the practice that you are. You're doing a fabulous job. We're seeing now the rise of anxiety and depression, really, I think, among all generations. But our focus is, since we work with college-age students, we're definitely seeing that rise. It's now been that way for several years. Talk to us about it from your perspective. What are the three top, or more than that if you have them, top contributors to this rise in anxiety and depression?
I think the theme under these three is uncertainty about the future of the world. We could talk about technology or fears of academic failure or finances, but the headline, and we've talked to college counseling centers, I've talked to my team, what are we seeing over these past 5 years? And it's really a global fear, not of the world, but of what is happening in our country. Will the world stay together? And then from that, it's, well, should I go to college? Should I take out loans? This 24/7 tech culture, sure, that's wearing on these kids. And then even parent modeling. We haven't looked at the Gen Xers who are raising these children. I'm one of them. I think you are too. And so what is our unique role? How have we shepherded, whether it's going to college or paying for it, or how do we look at the world? Are we scared? And how much does that then infiltrate these impressionable minds.
Would you say we came off of everything that was COVID related? And I've read some things that really tie, our COVID experience and how we responded to it as adding to it.
Absolutely. I think it seems that 2019 really began this about 5 years now of uncertainty, whether it's pandemic, internal struggle in our country, you name the topic, whether it's global fears, finances, you're right. The shutdown, and these kids were what, 10th grade, 9th grade when that happened, fundamentally changed how they did life in every respect.
Yeah. Yeah. Talk a little bit, because I've also read about the impact of social media on anxiety and depression. Unpack that one for us a little bit.
Sure. So a couple things. It's 24/7. Unless we regulate it, our teenagers' phones are beeping all night. They don't sleep. At least the technology doesn't. And so whether it's healthy interaction or not, there's a nonstop part to it. Much of it's unhealthy. And we see these young adults actually deleting their accounts because they cannot function. They can't wake up and face the day without, of course, hearing of someone's wonderful life or hearing of someone's horrible life, and everything is magnified. Nobody shares normal feedback, and it's just this intensity that isn't really designed for sanity. People older than college age can get into it, but it's this very scary, intense, overdone emotional reality.
Are you seeing, you mentioned it, and it's interesting in conversations that I have with my daughter and son-in-law, and they now have a daughter. And so we've had some conversations about, the use of phones and when should Haven have a phone. And she's only 10 months, so we've got some time. But it's fascinating having a conversation. You just kind of alluded to it here, that you are seeing kind of a trend of people canceling their social media accounts and choosing not to be part of it.
It's amazing to see. It's just maturity. It's struggling. It's talking to somebody, and then there's a group of kids who says there has to be a better way.
Yeah. So we recognize it. We've seen the books. We've seen the studies. We see it around us, the fact that anxiety and depression are a real thing. Our schools are doing, I think, a good job of responding, though I wouldn't say it's consistent across the board. So talk to us a little bit about how should they be responding, particularly since our colleges, in their mission and their setup, they may have a counseling program, but not all of them do. How should they be responding when they're just not the experts in this field?
Good question. So assuming that unlimited budgets exist at these colleges, a counseling center dedicated to caring for students for free is best. Now, obviously that's going to cost money, but the college you and I were at really had a robust counseling center with some licensed clinicians and a lot of master's level interns, confidential, unlimited therapy. And that's huge. But that alone won't do it. And even if there's no budget for that, there's a way to help. And it's top-down modeling. That means the president of the college, the VPs, middle management, chairs, professors talk about mental health, be vulnerable themselves in moderation, talk about that it's okay to get counseling. And as leaders model that, the students are going to open up to them. The students are going to go get therapy, whether it's through their health insurance or free on campus. But if we don't normalize it as leaders, there's going to be a trickle down. There's going to be a closed offness and secret struggle.
There are definitely, and I love that response because it's more of a proactive approach. And a lot of the responses that I've heard from our colleges tend to be in the reactive, like we just don't know how to handle the increased need of counseling for depression and anxiety. So they're just trying to quickly put something together, and very much reactive, as opposed to kind of creating a culture on your campus that it normalizes the recognition that their mental health is a thing, and to kind of demystify it a little bit, that it's not demonstrating the fact that you're weak if you need counseling, but to sort of normalize it. And I kind of like what you said there, a metered approach, right? It's important that leaders don't go overboard with this.
Right. We've all seen that, a passionate sermon that gets way too self-disclosing. But I think the best part is to communicate. You don't have to be hallucinating or wanting to die to get therapy. You don't go to the doctor until your gangrene has set in. It's for more than just severe conditions. It's maintenance.
Yeah. One of the things that I've seen, especially in our Christian worlds, we like to label things, and we've seen a lot of discipleship groups and small groups. Where is it similar and where is it different when we're talking about issues of counseling?
Yeah, so we all need that community. We need accountability. We need mentoring, and we need to mentor, no matter whether we're depressed, anxious, or worse. In addition, there's professional support. And so I can be a friend to my buddy in the discipleship group and be his friend and also recommend he see a therapist out there. It's no different, believe it or not, than any other medical specialty. The fear of psychology has been for 40, 50 years at least, that it's godless secularism, that the clinician will point someone in a direction other than God, which really does happen if it's not a Christ-informed clinician. So there's fear, but we are training, at least Bible colleges that I've been associated with, we are training clinicians to be in love with Jesus, who will not steer people another way. So when it's a healthy clinician, absolutely discipleship and mental health maintenance, because frankly, we are shaped by our childhood experiences and we need to process them with a trained professional.
Yeah. And I grew up in an era, and I think a lot of Gen Xers probably did. We were kind of on the tail end of, just whatever you're feeling, suck it up. And especially if you're a guy, just don't express your emotions, leave the past in the past, and just kind of move on, which may be a contributor as Gen Xers are parenting their kids. Maybe that's why we're seeing an increase in anxiety and depression.
I think you're right. And that did work for a while, Philip, that be quiet, don't feel, achieve. But as we get into our 40s, we see men, women just not being able to suppress and cope, and eventually they have to deal with all that stuff. But you're right, as Gen Xers get well, they're going to parent in a way that's sympathetic to counseling. And I've seen that so much openness by Gen X parents to their kids getting help.
It's something that just needs to be part of our regular vocabulary in all sectors, not only the higher education sector, but also the church sector. And I like the term that you used earlier, the normalization of it is such a critical piece of this. And recognizing the fact that there are multiple ways. I mean, we're social beings. God created us to live in community with people. And there are various parts of the community that help us in whatever life stage that we're in, whether it is discipleship groups or mentorship. It's probably too simplistic, but we talk about, if you're physically sick and you can't get over the cold and it's turned into an infection, where do you go? You go to the doctor, and the doctor prescribes medicine, a treatment plan, and we don't even think twice about that kind of a thing. But when it comes to mental health, there's just still kind of the stigma of, well, is it really that bad? Or if I do that, I'm expressing some level of weakness. Is that too simplistic of an example over to the medical field?
No, it rings true. That is the norm. What I have seen, I mentioned this in a college setting, in our private practice, we contract with local companies and corporate wellness initiatives. And when we train the leaders to normalize it, the president of companies, the executives, there's a change in morale. There's an openness. So many employees will come to us for therapy because their boss comes to us for therapy. And we've just seen it transform, not just productivity and morale, but financially, it makes better workers.
Yeah. I've seen an uptick in providers for mental health counseling and screening, and they provide them as service, especially in this world of telehealth, where post-COVID, pretty much anything we can do with our cell phones and an internet connection, right? So I even know in our sector, we've been approached by several companies that aren't necessarily Christian companies, but they provide as a free resource to students, you pay a subscription or something, access to telehealth counseling. Wise move for Christian colleges and universities?
Telehealth is better than nothing. And I think we've seen improvement. There's research saying it's effective. Absolutely. If cost is not an issue, for sure, an added service.
Yeah. And I would say, though, one of the things that you mentioned was so important that it's coming from a Christian perspective, the counseling. So kind of beware. There's a lot of options out there, but you never know what you're signing up for and who's going to be on the other end of that telehealth call if you don't vet them properly as a company.
Yeah, those are some of the hardest decisions I've ever made professionally, is when a friend or a family member needs therapy. and I can't send them to everybody I know because that won't work. I am scared. I need to vet these other therapists before I ever put a vulnerable person in the hands of a clinician, because this is their soul, this is their life. Yeah, I hope they're a good therapist, but are they going to stay true to Christian views? Not push them on the person, but have a worldview that's consistent with the life-giving truth we believe.
Yep. So just a word out there, if you're at a college or in a student development office, I know you see them, they come across your desk all the time of organizations that are out there. You're not properly meeting the need if the ones providing the counseling don't share the same worldview that you do as a college campus. So I'd say buyer beware with that sort of a thing. Faculty are often on the front line of these conversations. They see students. They are in the lives of students. You mentioned it earlier. We like to model for our students, and faculty oftentimes are the ones modeling for our students. And because we live in community and because we believe that God created us to live in community and discipleship and all of these things, our faculty members are deeply involved, engaged in the lives of students. Sometimes faculty take on more than they should. So what advice would you give to faculty who may be listening in, or administrators who provide leadership over the faculty, of knowing how to navigate those waters?
Yeah, well, I love the life on life attitude of most faculty, and that care, that mentoring. I love Luke 6:40 part B, but everyone who is fully trained will be like his teacher. And so there's that element of shaping, but boy, it can get deep quick, and it's like a declawed cat in the jungle. When a student is really struggling, the trust you've developed with them as faculty can be used to connect them to a therapist. People don't come see me in my private practice until their trusted physician says, Ryan will help you. Because they trust him, they come to me. And so that's the best thing a faculty member can do. I can't make a list of, well, if they say this, go see a therapist, but a great faculty mentor will know when to hand off and stay their mentor, but hand them to a clinician as well.
Yeah, there's a vulnerability and there's some power dynamics that are there. Speak to the importance of faculty members maintaining those lines. While you can't give a list of, well, if they say this, then it means this, but address the issue of, this is a faculty member, this is somebody who's in authority over, age-wise, a vulnerable age, sharing vulnerable information, the male-female dynamic. Work us through some of that.
There's a lot of great movies about avant-garde therapy that we should not follow. But yeah, I think when someone starts talking about depression, or I don't know if I can go on, or I'm too scared to even drive or go to class, or parents breaking up, loss, when we hear those key terms, we can pray with them, we can cry, we can love them. But it's a pretty frequent handoff, especially if there's an on-campus counseling center. Don't disrupt our mentorship, but please go see.
Yeah. Are you aware of, or do you provide services to train faculty and knowing kind of when some of those lines are getting crossed?
We do. So I did it in my department, but we were all therapists anyway. Yeah, we've actually gone into another college, and it was a voluntary asynchronous training. But yeah, the key would be talk to another professor if you're not sure, because once we enter into an emotional connection, we get blind. And so whether it's male, female, male, we don't see the insidious nature of over-connecting. And so just talk, consult with your chair. How do they see it? Talk about it in maybe a faculty meeting. But I would say the line obviously is suicidal comments, or I can't get out of bed, or I had a bad breakup, family stuff.
One of the things, and you touch on this, and this has been my experience as well, is that if a student is demonstrating some of those, warning signs, more than one person is aware of it. What doesn't happen is kind of that cross communication. And I've seen some models of early alerting that happens. Is that something that's, I assume it's legal to do that, and for colleges to set up systems where some alerting can happen?
Yeah, the college I was at, obviously it was in the student handbook informing them, and they signed it on admission, but it was a student concern form that anyone could fill out, and it was supposed to go to various places. And I think when it goes to other faculty, counseling center, and even library support services, it's pretty hard to let someone fall through the cracks.
It's part of the promise that colleges make to students and to families of the overall care that we're providing for them. That is just a transactional educational experience. There's something so much bigger that's happening. We're speaking into your life. These are formational years, spiritual formation, mental health, physical development in the 18 to 22, 23, brain development in the 18 to 23-year-old is still happening. They're not fully formed or shaped. And I think recognizing some of those things and having a sensitivity to it, I think is such an important thing. The role of the faculty can't be to say, well, that's somebody else's problem. At the same time, they can't take on so much liability and responsibility that if they're not the trained counselor, they have to be able to have that discernment to know, and boy, this is just something that's well beyond what my capacity is.
Good point. You mind, I want to add one piece.
Yeah.
When a student trusts you enough to disclose a shortcoming, a moral failure, or whatever, the way we respond is life-changing, good or bad. If they trust you enough to say, hey, I'm struggling with this, how do Christians respond to that? Do we judge them? Do we report them? Do they get written up? Or do we love them? Do we thank them? Do we refer them maybe to a clinician?
Yeah.
I've seen it go both ways.
Yeah. One of the best practices that you read about is no matter how small of an institution you are, the importance of providing confidentiality for students to share, decoupling that with the traditional student development office. Talk a little bit about that importance.
Exactly. Schools have standards and moral codes, and they should. But they also need a space for us to be real. We're all broken. We all have a shadow side. We're all sinners. They need a space to be real with somebody they trust. Now, obviously, if someone says that they're committing felonies, thanks for sharing, but we do need to intervene. But boy, more often the case is them struggling with something that I bet the professor struggles with too, if they'd be real. But do we write them up? Do we shun them? Or do we embrace them?
Yep. It goes to creating that culture. And I think it was you years ago that said, if you look at the national statistics that we often see about abuse and abusers and those who have been abused and alcohol abuse and drug abuse and pornography and all of those things, the same statistics that we quote are actually on our campus, among our leaders, among our faculty, among our staff. And recognition of that none of us have achieved, none of us have arrived in our walks with the Lord, none of us are made perfect. Those same issues exist among our faculty and staff.
Correct.
So for those of us who are older, I hope I'm not in that category. I probably am. Sometimes, and I still hear it, I hear it less, but there's kind of this mentality of, well, all of this is blown out of proportion. We just need Jesus, dismissive to reality. Talk about the damage that does.
It's sad. There was a book that came out in the 90s called Why Do Christians Shoot Their Wounded? And it's not a perfect book, but it just talks about that mentality, how we maybe shame a treatment or a person when they're most vulnerable. And I understand there's guardrails and secular humanism isn't good, and it did mess up a lot in the 70s and 80s. But boy, how hurtful would it be to hear that at your most vulnerable moment, to be invalidated, just say, figure it out.
Yeah, especially if somebody has the courage to say, I'm struggling with this issue. And if our response is a shutdown response.
Mm-hmm. There's a good, very small book by a Reformed author saying even Christians get depressed. Nice little book where he talks about his understanding through pain. And everyone quotes that Spurgeon struggled. We know he did. I don't know how much relief he got either. And I think Christians can be scared of our field, and I understand it, and I'm scared of my field too.
Yeah. But
it's not black and white. There's real treatment from healthy clinicians who fear Christ.
Ryan, this has been a great conversation. We have 3 minutes left. So let's touch, I talked about at top of show, one of the areas that you have ventured into is the creation of a ketamine institute, which it may not be new, but at least it feels like it's a newer treatment for anxiety and depression. You run one of those clinics. I've read some things online. Ketamine is obviously, comes in all kinds of shapes and forms. And sometimes there's this, I can't believe that, Christians would even do this kind of thing. So dispel for us. You got 3 minutes to do it. Make the case for this type of treatment, an emerging new treatment.
Sure. It's been helping people for about 20 years, but not really on
Wow.
the East Coast, especially Lancaster. And so for years, we would refer to DC, Baltimore, Philly for patients. And so just to give you a background, ketamine's 65 years old. It's an anesthesia. Doctors use it to knock us out for surgery. About 20 years ago, they found that microdoses, so 1/10 of the knockout anesthesia dose, changes brain chemistry back to where it should be in terms of severe PTSD or severe major depressive disorder, for which no meds have worked. We're talking people in therapy 10 years, Christ followers or not, tried every medicine, and they're struggling. They're at the end of their rope. And they found that 6 IV infusions over 3 weeks, so twice a week, 3 weeks, literally eradicates those decades-long symptoms. At least 85% of the clients, which is a huge, huge number. Yes, it's been abused like every other medicine that has also saved people. But we're at 1/10 of the dose that they give in anesthesia. It's administered by anesthesiologists, nurse practitioners. All I do is the intake screening because it is a medical practice. It can't be abused, at least at our practice. Can you get it on the street? Probably. Nobody gets stoned. Nobody gets high. No one falls asleep. It's this baby dose that helps their mind relax. And we have a therapist there to help them work on things. But yes, it fundamentally returns the synaptic connections with the glutamate receptor back to where it should be in our brain.
Yeah. And as a psychotherapist, you've seen the statistic is 85%. Would you concur with that that's what you're seeing as you're doing follow-up sessions with your patients?
Yeah. And it's amazing. Granted, we're only sending 10% of our private practice people to get this. This is not for everybody. But yes, it's beautiful. We cry when we see the person who couldn't get out of bed, who couldn't function, whose family doesn't know what to do. Now they're back to the level playing field. They can deal with all the problems in life unencumbered by this chemical problem.
Yeah. And it doesn't make those issues go away. It just brings them back to a stable point to be able to, in a healthy way, deal with whatever those issues that they're dealing with in life. Well, Ryan, this has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and your experiences with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Philip.
Absolutely. And again, a special shout out to Logos Bible Software. Appreciate their sponsorship. And if you'd like more information about what Ryan does, we put a link to his website that you can take a look at and learn maybe a little bit more about how ketamine is being used, but also just the importance of us rolling up our sleeves, not ignoring it, and just addressing the problems that are in front of us with our students and helping them in the process, discipling them, counseling them as they conform to the image of Christ. So until next time, stay kingdom focused.